Let's get it.
I've got one that can see.
Well, good afternoon and good evening and good night, everybody, and welcome back to the broadcast. And here we are at Visual Disturbance Community, and we would just welcome you all with all open arms here, folks, because tonight I've got a really interesting conversation piece with a very cool friend that I just met a few months ago, and he's an archaeologist, and he knows one thing or two or maybe 10 things about Göbekli Tepe, probably 10,000 things, and it's one of my favorite subjects and something that I really want to go to as far as the bucket list. And possibly one of these days down the road, I'll be able to go to this ancient site because you guys know how I love archaeology. You guys know what I know about that, and just a good old Kentucky boy from the redneck side of eastern Kentucky talking about archaeology, and I love it. It's one of my things. So, to this topic tonight, where we're going to be talking about the Stargate of the Watchers of Göbekli Tepe mystery, it's really intriguing to me because this topic alone, when you think about Stargate, you think about the biblical watchers, and you think about what really lies beneath the Göbekli Tepe and the mysteries behind it, and the mysteries underneath the earth. And tonight, I'm going to introduce with you guys would know him as the Maverick. He's an archaeologist. He's a well-rounded individual. The man's getting ready to go on coast to coast just right after this program. So this evening. So without further ado, I want to welcome you guys and welcome Aaron Judkins, the Maverick, to Visual Disturbance Channel. How the heck are you? You doing okay, Aaron? And thank you for being here.
Oh yeah. Hey, Brian, thank you for having me on Visual Disturbance here. Yeah, I'm doing great. Doing great.
That's awesome, my friend. I am so ecstatic to have you on the channel tonight. We're going to be talking about Göbekli Tepe and all these things that are just so compelling to me and intriguing to me. When you think about the comet, the speculation with the fringe topics, with the conspiracies behind it, Göbekli Tepe is a hot zone right now. It's been a big topic in the last few years. I know it's been a place that you've surveyed and looked at. And let's just start into it. Aaron, let everybody know who you are, what got you into archaeology, and talk about your endeavors and talk about just briefly on who you are. Open, and it's a very open, calmly chat tonight, and we want to be respectful to all the guests here on this channel. But Aaron Judkins, just introduce yourself to the folks and tell them who you are, and then we'll start just jumping right into the Göbekli Tepe subject.
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Aaron Judkins. I've been all around the world on expeditions and excavations. For me, this really started back really in 2004 when I went on an excavation in Israel at the Pool of Siloam. And this is, you may have heard this because of the recent excavations there now, but in 2004, we initially excavated the steps to the Pool of Siloam that led from the pool to the temple. So I was on that initial excavation, and then from there, it just broadened out for me on many different things. But folks may know me from my work with L.A. Marzulli down in Peru and Bolivia on the Paracas elongated skulls. Also from my film Finding Noah, which went out in theaters back in 2015. And it was a documentary theatrical release that chronicled our journey up Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey in search for Noah's Ark. And then most recently, probably from 2017, early 2018, is the discovery of Dead Sea Scroll Cave 12, where our team, in conjunction with Dr. Randall Price, Liberty University, and Hebrew University, we discovered the 12th Dead Sea Scroll Cave, which made international headlines and also made the front cover of National Geographic in December 2018 issue. So I've been on some amazing journeys for sure. And just my love of history and Southwest archaeology here in the States and Native Americans. But my forte is really in biblical archaeology in the Near East. And so that's what really kind of led me up to writing the book called Decoding Göbekli Tepe. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
I've got it displayed on the screen, my friend. Yeah, go check it out, folks. The link is in the description. Help Aaron Judkins get this information out. Decoding Göbekli Tepe from a biblical perspective. So go check it out. And it's in the Amazon link right in the description. So check that out if you get an opportunity, folks. You'd be glad you did. And Aaron, I got a couple questions for you. Let's just start this thing off here in Göbekli Tepe. So, the conventional view on this, there's a lot of folks out there that have these notions to speculate. A lot of people out there come down the conspiracy rabbit hole like myself, but I've never been to Göbekli Tepe. And it's just like one of those things where I just ponder on really what has happened here. What is really going on in Göbekli Tepe? And the question I have to ask you about this is, when it comes to a conventional view, simple hunter-gatherers, right? The thing I think about is a simple hunter-gatherers built this. And then I'm thinking, it can't be possible, just simple-minded, so-called, they claim the Denisovians, the barbaric, type of creature they so-called was. That's what they talk about when it comes to the Younger Dryas event. I just can't get past it. And what's your take on that? Is it impossible that this is even a theory? Like, how could the simple hunter-gatherers create this facility, create this ancient astronomical site here?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. The conventional narrative is that this was a hunter-gatherer group of people that lived in the area. This, of course, Göbekli Tepe is in southeastern Turkey, present day. It's in the area, in the greater area called Anatolia. And there's a lot of ancient history here. Matter of fact, Paul has done a lot of missionary journeys into this part, biblically Asia Minor. And so Turkey has a lot of history that probably most people aren't aware of. Of course, Paul founded some of the churches in Asia Minor. So it's an interesting question, because the conventional narrative is that hunter-gatherers in the pre-pottery Neolithic, which is before the invention of pottery, or also more commonly known as the Stone Age, built this megalithic site. And when Dr. Klaus Schmidt, who first excavated this in the mid-1990s, recognized it as a Neolithic site. Now, it got mislabeled as a Byzantine cemetery, I think, in the 1960s. But he immediately recognized it as more significant archaeological site. The problem is when they begin to excavate, of course, there was just a stone that, the farmer who owned that land, he hit this big stone and he tried to actually move it out of the way, and he realized he couldn't. It was a cut stone. It was huge. And so he called people in to help him. What they realized was that as Dr. Klaus Schmidt began to excavate this, that this was a monolithic site. And as they began to excavate and go down in the layers in the dirt, they realized that this is these enclosures were completely under the ground. So this is in Turkey, it's called in Israel they call it a tel, which is a mound. Um, in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, Tepe is a mound, and Göbekli means in English it would mean like a pregnant hill or potbelly hill or also a navel hill. So the same terminology applies to a tell, but this is a big mound. It's about 22 acres, and when they hit these monolithic structures, uh, they realized this um, that this really turned archaeology kind of upside down. It's not what they expected. So they had um, multiple enclosures. In enclosure D, for instance, there's two 18.5 foot tall monoliths. They're faceless T pillars. They're anthropomorphic, and uh, and what they began to understand was that how could simple hunter gatherers build such a complex megalithic structure? I mean, there's multiple enclosures here at Göbekli Tepe, and you got to understand that the quarry site's about a quarter of a mile away, and the monolithic means that they didn't cut several pieces of stone, put them together. They cut them out in one single slab of stone, these T pillars, and then from a quarter of a mile away, and then put them into position at Göbekli Tepe. So what this shows is an organization of labor, a division of labor. It shows complexity in the society, things that in the textbooks will tell you that that's not possible. That they were hunter gatherers, they lived a simple life. So this really kind of turns the whole archaeological understanding kind of upside down. So this is really where we're at with Göbekli Tepe. It's of course they've labeled this the oldest religious temple ever discovered. Some people don't like the terminology temple, but certainly it is one of the oldest sites in the conventional dating of Göbekli Tepe, showing this huge monolithic architecture in the Stone Age.
Well, I have a question, just to kind of piggyback off of the other question, and I have this theory on it, really. Here we are talking about hunter gatherers, and we know the primitive technology. Just having a chisel, having a shovel. Even today, we couldn't even replicate this, Aaron. I mean, come on, this place is beyond ancient. Good night.
Yeah.
I mean, we couldn't do this with $1 trillion to replicate it. I mean, it would take a fleet of people, and it would probably take 30 years to construction, maybe even with AI advancements, it would take forever. But I have this theory. So, have you ever heard of acoustic levitation? Anything to that level? Or builders didn't just use brute force, but could they have used like sound waves to manipulate? We had what are we looking at here? 50-ton stones and making them weightless. You hear that theory about some type of I think the terminology is piezoelectric grid. I think there's something they've just recently discovered there. Speaking of the elements underneath Göbekli Tepe, a lattice of quartz, I think if my memory serves me correct, and some copper beneath the site. And you're talking then the capability of conductivity. I mean, what are we looking at here? I know some of the things in your book you've written of like similar to a thing what I would refer to as a Stargate, a connection to the sky to the from the heavenly realm to the earthly realm. And what is going on here, Aaron? Is there something to it that I'm thinking about here? Am I almost on the trail of this with the acoustic levitation and having some type of ancient technology that as far as now we've lost that technology, so to speak? Is there something like that happening to me? Call it a little speculative, call it a little bit of theory, but there you go. There's a question from the visual disturbance side of things.
Yeah, well, there's really no evidence for acoustic levitation at Göbekli Tepe. I know that there's been reports of that from, I think, like some African tribes, perhaps, or uh, in other places doing that. You know, I don't know about all that. It's a little bit outside of the realm of archaeology. Um, but for sure, we know that, we did discover the quarry site. They had cut out these stones. Um, I just don't think that there's any evidence for acoustic levitation. Now, back at that time, there was probably, this is along the Fertile Crescent. uh, it's on the highest point of the Jurmis mountain range. It overlooks the plain of Haran, and then just about 9 miles away is Shanlurfa. This is also biblical Edessa, uh, way back in the Old Testament. This is also where Abraham was raised. So we have a lot of history here, but regarding the acoustic levitation, I don't think there's any evidence for that. And I don't know how you would prove prove that they moved the stones by levitation. But going back to the Fertile Crescent, they did have, probably at that time, they had a lot of trees. There's no trees in this area now except for what's been planted. But they certainly moved those stones, probably in just how we would probably move stones if we were back in those days. Used leverage and probably trees and logs to help move those stones. They're heavy, and so that would really just really be one of the probably ways that they did that, is moving those stones just by those techniques with ropes and pulleys and things like this, maybe rolling them along with these logs. But certainly it's estimated that probably 500 men was probably there to at least construct the site. That's what some of the numbers are showing us, that the complexity and how large this site is, it would probably take at least 500 men to move these stones and set them up and build them.
And that's kind of like what I was thinking about earlier when people have basically speculated that this is the Denisovian people that, supposedly derived. I've heard Denisovians, people claiming that they're the Nephilim of the biblical narrative, and I know that we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But, with Göbekli Tepe not having the trees, the forestry that you're referring to, could there have been a cataclysm? I think if my memory serves me correct, we're talking about a comet of some shape or form, and then 10,950 BC, if that's correct, and then you think about the Younger Dryas event. Could it have been like triggered by a global cataclysm, Aaron, or wiping out the megafauna and the resetting of civilization? What are we looking at here, my friend? It's we could speculate so much, but I know you've had your hands on it. You looked at it. You've visualized it. You probably even drawed things on it. I've seen in your book, showing some imagery and what have you. I mean, there's so much here. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So great question. So the Younger Dryas event was a global cataclysmic event that happened. We know that at least at some point in time, either by a comet or strike or probably a lot of volcanism around the Earth, something happened. I think that's all points back to the precipice of Noah's flood, because that's the mechanism for what we know as the Ice Age. And then right after the Ice Age, you have so probably 500 years after the flood, you have this mechanism because of the ecology changes in the Earth. You would have a lot of volcanism that's occurring. It's spewing out a lot of sulfur dioxide and other gases in the Earth, and because of that, and probably a lot of other things like maybe comets. I don't think there's evidence of a comet strike, but there's certainly evidence for meteor impacts around. But you have when you put in earthquakes, which triggers the volcanism around the Earth, whatever's happening here completely changes everything. So going back to the flood, you have 500 years after the flood or so, then you have this mechanism for the Ice Age. So the temperatures drop probably at least 30 degrees worldwide. The ocean levels drop between 200 and 400 feet. You have all these gases being spewed out into the Earth, and you basically have this this kind of winterized conditions that forces people to move. And there's a clear evidence, even here in America, there's clear evidence of the Younger Dryas impact that I think over in Clovis, New Mexico, there's a record of occupation in the layers, and then there's just nothing. So probably this lasted probably for about 1,000 years. And then scientists say that there's after this event, there's what they call the meltwater pulse 1A event, which global temperatures then increased. It caused a lot of the ice to begin to melt. The ocean levels rose back up between 200 and 400 feet. And so people who had built civilizations along the coastline got reflooded out because the ocean levels began to rise again. So the sun came out, and then you have the sudden emergence of civilization that just suddenly springs up out of nowhere. And this is, I think, right where Göbekli Tepe lands.
Wow. So not only that, when you think about, wasn't this location where supposedly it was the origins of agriculture of that time? Am I correct on that? That this is the main site for gardening and what have you? Are we looking at a site where the Watchers have top man at this particular location, longitude, latitude? Are we looking at cosmological things? I mean, what are we looking at here? Is there anomalies? Because I'm thinking,
Yeah.
What's under the ground, platinum. I think there's platinum, and forgive me if I'm wrong, nano diamonds. I mean, we have so many different things in this site. What is it? I think, have you ever heard the term black mat layer? Is that correct? Over at Göbekli Tepe, is that correct? Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, I don't know that they found that there.
Sure.
But certainly what you're talking about, Göbekli Tepe, this is prior to the advent of agriculture. So here's what we know, that they found thousands of sickle blades, and grinding stones, pestles, mortars, and then along that, along the plains of Haran there, we know that there was wild grains there, and that they were harvesting these grains and then bringing them back. So couple of different species of wild wheat and wild barley, and then they would take these grains. They were very tiny. So this was probably right before the advent of agriculture, where civilizations actually began to grow, and they would settle in, like at Çatalhöyük, which is dated several thousand years after Göbekli Tepe, but certainly this was a site that probably 8 to 10,000 people lived in, and then you would have them taking these grains, planting them, replanting the seeds, to get a stable food source. And this is why the seeds went from a little tiny grain, which was easily just shaken out of the hull, to a more stable crop where you would have to strip the grain to get the seed out. So that only happens with planting and replanting. But definitely this is all after the fall of the 200 Watcher angels that came down on Mount Hermon. So this goes back to Genesis 6. This goes back to the Book of Enoch, specifically where it talks about these 200 class Watcher angels descended on Mount Hermon, and then they made a pact. And basically what they did was they really interfered in the affairs of man. This was a boundary that they crossed that was a hard line. They weren't supposed to do that, but they did. And part of this was them imparting knowledge to mankind. So weapons, just different things, right? So it kind of sources all that information out, but basically this knowledge was kind of passed down to men, and then as the civilizations came along, certainly they began to have knowledge on how to do some of these things that they, such as astronomy and how to study the stars and the patterns and the moon and the sun. So definitely, this is an area that's outside the realm of archaeology, but there's a theological influence here, that if you believe the biblical record about the time in Genesis and in the Old Testament, you see that definitely there was other things happening here where people began to worship other gods, and so the knowledge of God, the original Creator Yahweh, was forgotten out of their knowledge, and then they began to turn to other gods. And I think this is some evidence that we're seeing at Göbekli Tepe, specifically, as them worshiping other gods.
You took the words out of my mouth there, Aaron. I was literally going to be highlighting your book here. I was actually going to ask you that question about the fallen angels in the Book of Enoch. You took the words right out of my mouth, my friend. So basically, what I'm hearing, my friend, you're talking about am I hearing this right? That Göbekli Tepe could possibly be like in a place that they ascended from the heavenly realm.
Well, probably not where they ascended from, but certainly my co-author, Dr. Judd Burton, uh, basically postulates in the book that there was a Watcher influence, uh, perhaps at Göbekli Tepe. The reason is because these gods that they were, I think, venerating at the site were particularly a couple of specific gods, but they point before probably some of these Mesopotamian gods in the pantheon. But I've identified a couple of logograms on the stones that specifically are related to deities.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. It's interesting, Aaron. It's a lot to take in, really. And this kind of goes along with the other question here. Speaking of what you've seen, there's a particular pillar that I want to talk about here, and then I think you've written about it in your book too. Also, the Vulture Stone, and I think you might have mentioned it earlier. Maybe I misheard you, but is there a connection there of a story of judgment? Is what we're looking at here? I know we're talking about constellations and things that are up in the sky, but I know we're talking about fallen angels, watchers. Is there some significance there that what's on there with the scorpion, the bird, the vulture? What's going on there with the three handbags? I mean, there's a lot here to take in. Is there something to do with the Vulture Stone that is so telling? What's going on there?
Some people postulate that the Vulture Stone is a record of a impact, because of the scorpion. They, and the birds that are on there. Of course, at the very top, you have these birds, and you have what you reference as handbags or baskets up at the top. And so some researchers have said, well, these animal reliefs are related to constellations in the sky. But I think there's another possibility that we have to consider, is that the Vulture Stone, I think it's Pillar 43, is a record of regeneration. So if we go back to look at their cosmology, they have, at least in a sense, venerated not only their ancestors through the stones, but they have also put deities on these stones, that at least they're making libations or probably offerings to. So the record of the Vulture Stone, I think, is that it's a story of, at the bottom of the stone there's a headless man, and I think what they're telling us is that in the regeneration theory, when your loved one dies, they have to be regenerated in the afterlife. So let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel event, there's a confusion of the languages, and they get scattered. I think it's not too long after. Camera went out. Hold on.
Apologies, folks. We will be right back with his camera feed. But
All right,
yeah,
how's that?
it's still
Am I
not
back?
on. There it is. You are back, my friend. You are back live.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, folks. Continue on there, Aaron. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So basically, what happens is right after the Tower of Babel event, there's a confusion of the languages and they get scattered. Göbekli Tepe is right after this event, in my opinion, going back on the biblical timeline. And so Pillar 43, so now they're post Babel, they're worshiping other gods, they're dispersed according to their languages. There's 70 languages that give birth here, and then this leads into the 70 nations. But so they're already going after and worshiping other gods. What we see at Göbekli Tepe on Pillar 43 is that they have lost the original connection through the Garden of Eden. They there was a there was this rebellious event by Nimrod at the Tower of Babel, and then you have the scattering. When your loved one dies, to be regenerated back to eternal life, you have to go to the netherworld, and for them to get back to their connection with God, they believed you had to go back through Mother Eve. And so what the vulture stone is telling us is that the headless man down at the bottom is a person who has died. And these baskets on the top, if you look at them, they have wheat in these baskets. And then you have the vulture um, uh, iconography at the top, who's taken this basket of these three baskets of wheat, probably as an offering to the gods for their loved one. And so you have this regeneration cycle where you're being basically, you know, rebirthed in the netherworld, and because of that, they go back through their mother Eve, who basically is the only one that can recreate them in the afterlife. And so when they do this, there's this whole thing that happens that before you can be rebirthed back as a star god into the heavens. So they revered constellations such as probably the constellation Taurus, perhaps the constellation Orion, and for them to be able to regain this eternal life, they went back through this process called the regeneration theory. So this is what the vulture stone is telling us, that a dead man or person can be regenerated back to the afterlife, to back to the heavens. And there's other reasons why I think this, but specifically the vulture stone is telling this particular story. And in the book Decoding Göbekli Tepe, I'll talk about the connection of the iconography of the vulture that's linked with Eve. So there's a lot of things happening here, but it's all pointing back to a regeneration, at least in some of the enclosures, like enclosure D, it's pointing back to this regeneration theory.
Well, Aaron, I'm glad you brought that up because I have this really interesting question that kind of goes along with that one. Speaking of one of the pillars, but I think it's called the T-shaped pillar, if I'm not mistaken. I think you referenced it in your book. This one really got me, my friend. This one really got me. I thought about it, and it really got me. So I think if I've got the arms and hands and the belt and the long cloth, I think you mentioned in your book. So I have a question for you. So this that has human features, right? Like arms and belts. So is it represent deified ancestors? Is that what we're looking at? Or is it something else? Is it like when you referred to a minute ago, is it referring to the book of Adam? You know, when you look in the Genesis narrative, are we talking about Adam and Eve? Is this what this representation is of this long cloth and this belt and these arms and hands? Is that, or is it something else? Are we missing something here? Is this an ancient Stargate? I mean, what is it? This is interesting.
Yeah. So in enclosure D specifically, there's these two 18.5-foot tall monolithic T stones. Now they're not a T that sits like this. The T part is turned like this, facing toward you. they're faceless, but they're anthropomorphic, meaning that they're human-like. So they do have arms and hands that wrap around to the navel. They're wearing a fox pelt loincloth in front with a belt that's holding that up. And then on Western Pillar 31, you have up here where the neck would be, up at the top, just under the head, you have an emblem that's carved in the stone of a bull cranium. This is a bull with horns. On Eastern Pillar 18, which is next to it, you have the crescent star, which is a crescent moon with a sun disk above that. And then above that, you have an H-looking symbol. It's not an H. More particularly, it's probably two people facing each other, joining hands. This crescent star, and I document this in the book, but the crescent star is known throughout history. It's it always points back to a female deity, the crescent star. So later on in history, we see the crescent star being used, and we see this in archaeology. We see it on other reliefs of this crescent star, which is the crescent moon and the sun disk above that. Later on, this deity becomes known as Inanna. It becomes known as Ishtar, Ashtar, Ashtaroth. So, and the symbol of the crescent star goes back to the planet Venus. So, in Eastern Pillar 18, they have the crescent star, which is the deification of a female deity. On Western Pillar 31, you have this emblem of the bull cranium again, the bull skull with horns. And so here's the question, Brian. Why would you depict these two giant pillars that are way taller than all the other surrounding pillars that actually was the supporting structure of the enclosure, with other animal reliefs and things like this, and these zoomorphic iconography? But why would you have these two central pillars placed in enclosure D wearing foxpelt loincloths? The only thing that makes sense is that this goes back to the biblical narrative of Genesis, where the people who lived at Göbekli Tepe were venerating their two original ancestors, Adam and Eve. And so we see the veneration of Adam through the bull god, and Nu, which is the emblem of the ox or the bull. So he is venerated, he is deified as the first god, Anu, which is in Sumerian. When you break down Anu or An, the A means father or ancestor. The N in Sumerian means to be placed on high or to be placed in the highest. So we see in the Sumerian pantheon, Anu is the highest god of the pantheon. In Eastern Pillar 18, we see the deification of Eve through the crescent star. And they have not only deified Adam, they have deified Eve. And because of this is exactly why you see these two anthropomorphic pillars that are covering their nakedness in stone. They are venerating, they have deified and they are venerating their two original ancestors. And this all is tied in with the regeneration theory on when you died, you had to go back through your ancestors for eternal life. And this is exactly where we see the Adam being deified as the bull god Anu, and Eve being deified through the crescent star as the sacred mother goddess. And basically through their two original ancestors, that they believe that they can be rebirthed back to the afterlife as a star god.
So on Visual Disturbance, when I have guests on, I always throw the wrench in the motor. Such a bizarro question, so I'm getting ready to ask you one.
All right.
Has these pillars ever been checked for a human signature, like on a human blood component? So I'm going down the rabbit hole here. I'm throwing a wrench in the motor. Have you ever thought about that on that level? If there's any blood residence or DNA or what have you on those two pillars?
Yeah, there's no evidence that's been found. Of course, that wouldn't that any blood component, if there were any, would have disintegrated thousands of years ago. I mean, it just won't hold up to that kind of time. So there's no evidence of that being discovered. However, Brian, there was a shallow grooved stone vessel that was placed at the base of one of the enclosures, and the only reason to have a shallow grooved stone vessel is probably for libations, and obviously this was for some kind of liquid, whether it was for blood or for water or for something else. But certainly there was some kind of a little shallow drainage channel in this stone vessel. And perhaps this was part of the libations or the offerings that they were making in these enclosures. So it's very interesting that that we see, skull fragments that they're not entire skulls, but they're fragmented skulls. But at least in some of the fragments, there's drill holes through the top of the skulls. And I think probably what's happening is, by the way, they did find 3 human burials now at Göbekli Tepe. 2 were buried together, and then 1 was buried separately across the way. But this is exactly what we would expect to find with people in the Neolithic. Going back to Çatalhöyük, which is in the region, that site that probably was a home to 8 to 10,000 people. This was a huge site. It's been excavated. It's been fully documented since probably the 1940s, 1950s. They found human burials under the floors of their homes. Now, adjacent to the circular enclosures at Göbekli Tepe, they found rectangular structures, and at least at one of them, they found these human burials. So it's pretty interesting that the full picture has not emerged from a Göbekli Tepe. Probably only a maximum of 10% has been excavated. At the time of the book, when I wrote the book, it was estimated between 5 and 10%. But now they realized that people lived at the site. There was human burials, at least 3 that they've discovered so far, and this is something that we I think points to people living there at the site full time, and at Göbekli Tepe. This seems to be the case.
So, speaking of a Stargate, I'm still stuck on that. I haven't really got to ask you another question, but when you think about the Axis Mundi, I think you might have referenced this in your book. So we're looking at a connection with the underworld, the earth, the heavens, and its alignment with a specific star system, right? Like Cygnus. And I was thinking about, is this the gods? Is this serving a beacon to return home? And let me explain why I'm throwing this out here. So I've always heard like there's these pillars, right? We're talking about Göbekli Tepe, but I've looked in other things I've researched with Afghanistan, different locations that are come to antiquity or pre-Adamic or before the flood of Noah, antediluvian realm. So why is there always 2? There was large, supposedly in Afghanistan not too long ago. We got to watch what we say. There was 2 caskets. So we have 2 that's deifying basically what we're referring to as Adam and Eve, and these pillars. There's a signature there of basically deifying these folks as there's something of a worship level, and I think that's what you just explained. But my point is, why is there 2 always? And then it always goes back to when the sons of God made the daughters of men, and a little bit before that, I think it might be the seed. Like we're talking about put enmity between the seed. You know about the serpent. Genesis 3:15 tells a lot, and I know you've referred to that many times, even when we talked in person and seen each other at SpiracyCon, Aaron. This stuff is so fascinating to me. I mean, it's mesmerizing when you look back to the biblical account and then you look through the watcher's stance and you're saying, there's a watcher. That's why I mentioned the element of DNA, blood. I was just thinking, could they have preserved something within the pillar? Or could it be, I'm always thinking like the fringe topics. I always like to really throw some very interesting, questionnaires out there. So my take is the underworld, this connection, and with this Axis Mundi, it reminds me of the Hinduism mythology, talking about the Lokas and the Talas. I mean, Aaron, this stuff is sensational, man, to think about when you really focus on the particular topic. So it's we have astronomy. We have all these different astronomers probably go crazy over this site. Do they study the way the constellations go across Göbekli Tepe? Has there been any kind of evidence of that? Do they study the way they hit, like with the equinoxes and the solstices? I mean, is there something about the sun aligning like a calendar? Are we on the Enochian language? Is there something to do with the Watchers when it comes to the light spectrum? I mean, I'm all over the place, but just to summarize it, we have an ancient fallen angel. We have like the sons of God made with the daughters of men. We have the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch talks about these specific angels, the 200 watchers on Mount Hermon that come down on the mountain. They teach metallurgy. They teach different languages, what have you, anything under the sun, right? Makeup for women, etc. So this Göbekli Tepe site, is it built on an ancient ley line? Is it built on an energy source where, like you're talking about, there's only a certain percentage of it not being excavated? The stuff that's been coming out in Egypt with Karnak, what could you find in Göbekli Tepe, Aaron, if they could do full excavation? And if my memory serves me correct, I think that you can't even do such a thing for like another 150 plus years, if I'm correct on that. But what could you find if Egypt has the Karnak scenario? I mean, it's not a Karnak, but in Egypt, at Giza, I kept saying Karnak because Karnak's an interesting place. But in Giza, with these cylinder so-called, radar, they looked at all the little villages, supposedly speculation. But what's going on here, Aaron? I mean, is it getting ready? Is Göbekli Tepe a site that's getting ready to pull the plug, to pull the lid off this thing and really show some things for future humans? Are they trying to tell us something? Is this an ancient calendar, an ancient relic of information?
Yeah, there's folks have studied on this. The astronomy aspect of Göbekli Tepe, if the enclosures are oriented to the solstices, it seems to be that may be the case, that they are oriented a specific way for the light to particularly hit in a certain way in the enclosures. Now they probably had roofs on the enclosures. They're open to the sky now, but at one time they were roofed. We know that because there's pot marks on top of the T-pillars where it looks like wooden poles or posts have been placed to rest on as a supporting structure for the roof. Regarding the ley line, and there's not enough work yet done on that because only a handful of enclosures have been excavated. It took 10 years alone just to excavate enclosure D. Now they're slowing excavations down. There's rumors that they've stopped it altogether. That's not true, but they have slowed down excavations. Going back to your point, at the previous rate of excavations, it would have probably taken over between 100 and 150 years to excavate the whole entire site. That's not going to happen in our lifetime. It's probably in several lifetimes. That's unfortunate because there's at least 20 other enclosures that are buried that have not been excavated. So I think there's a lot more that certainly there's more under the ground that needs to be excavated. That would help us understand the archaeoastronomy of the site, how it's laid out. We know that the enclosures fell into disrepair at some point. They repaired them. Probably, generations later, they were repairing some of these enclosures. But going back to the other point of what can we find, I think we're going to be able to find so much more. And I think hopefully for me, I would like to see more of these pillars being excavated to see if they have these Luvian logograms, which goes back to Anatolian hieroglyphics. And that's exactly what we're seeing now on the stones. I'm talking about that in the book. This is Luvian logograms that are on the pillars. Going back to the gods, there's one particular logogram in Luvian. Let me just explain. The Luvians were contemporaneous with the Hittites. And the Luvians had a...
Just 1 second, folks. 1 second. Aaron will be right back. There you are.
Yeah, so the Luvians had another language. They had a common everyday language, but they had another language that they used specifically for writing formally on monumental stone, and that was this Anatolian hieroglyphics, specifically the Luwian logogram. So logogram is one picture that represents a word. So if you're writing on stone, you have limited space, you want to make it count. So these logograms were perfect for that. We know that the Hittites adopted the Luwian logograms into their culture and used it. But the problem is Luwian logograms were not in the Stone Age. They're in the Bronze Age and definitely in the Iron Age, but not in the Stone Age. Stone Age, which this is designated as a pre-pottery Neolithic age site before the invention of pottery, there should be no Luwian logograms on the stones at Göbekli Tepe. Yet I think that's exactly what we're seeing. If that's the case, then we have a chronology problem here. Perhaps it's not as old as they think. Perhaps it's Bronze Age.
I'm glad you mentioned the Luwian's language there and decoding that and really talking, because I know you talked about that within your book. I have a question for you, talking about the pillars, and we talked about the H and the T shapes. And I think you talked about this in your book, Aaron. Does it translate out to be God's house or gate? Is that what this is in the Luwian language? Is that correct?
Yeah, there's one particular stone in the enclosures, and I think it may be enclosure C, where this logogram for Deus. Now, not all the logograms have been deciphered. There's a lot of them. Hundreds of these characters have been deciphered. But what we know clearly is that the logogram for Deus, which is the Latin for God, is on the stone at Göbekli Tepe. And then right above that, we have another logogram, which could indicate the symbol for a house or a temple. So these two logograms are on one stone. Again, I think in enclosure C, and this, I think, if you transliterate this, it could indicate the house or the temple of the gods. And so this all goes back to the duplicity that you were talking about. Why is there always two? It goes back to duplicity, this dual nature, and that always points back to the two original ancestors of Adam and Eve. And so now you have both of these figures that are deified. And again, going back to the regeneration theory, the only way you can be rebirthed in the afterlife is to go back specifically through your mother Eve to get reborn, because after all, the female is they understood it as a mystery of creation, so they can give birth and they can procreate, but the female is the only one that can give birth. So they saw this as a regeneration of the father through the son on the male line. And so specifically, these stones, I think, represent and tell a story about the regeneration. And going back to those fragmented skulls, they don't take the whole body in. There was probably some kind of a process like a sky burial or burial under the floor. But after about a year or so, after they're defleshed, they just take the skull into these enclosures, probably in enclosure D, and perform some kind of libation ceremony in front of these two 18 and a half foot pillars that are anthropomorphic, that I think are Adam and Eve. And they're performing some kind of a ritual or ceremony in there. So your loved one that's in the netherworld that's being destroyed, you just don't go into eternal life. You have to go to the netherworld where you're destroyed and you're recreated. I think they took these skulls, they suspended them with the drill holes, perhaps in the enclosures, and look, because they're roofed, and there was a procession specifically into enclosure D, where a processional way where you walked in, and then bench seating, kind of a circular bench seating around. If you took a torchlight in there, that would cast shadows from the statues onto the walls. And when they saw that, the shadows, that became living embodiments of those stones. And so this is exactly what they're doing, I think, at least in enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe. What?
But yeah, folks. One more moment here, and we had a little tech issue there, but that's okay because we're live. That's how things happen here. But I want to really stay there real quick. There, Aaron, you are back here in about 10 seconds, right? I think so. Well, you're still here. I have a question for you. Speaking of these holes that you're talking about drilled before we conclude today's program, I thought about it, and I have to ask you this quick question: is this a resurrect? Well, it's a couple. It's actually a two-part question. Is this a resurrection machine? I know you keep referring to certain things. And I don't believe in reincarnation or resurrecting to that level. I'm more on I'm actually all the way fully like you are on the biblical side of things, absolutely. But when I talk about and think about these drill holes, what if it's is the term that I think you mentioned in your book, talking about the Cygnus constellation, the hole in the sky? Is it kind of Is it kind of depicted off of that, like there's a hole in your top of your skull? Is there anything to do with that? And suggesting the belief of like I think you referred to like soul transfer or transcendence of like the stars. Is that what we're looking at here? The ancients trying to play around and trying to play with the codes of God. I mean, what do we got here, my friend? Is there any connection to that whatsoever?
If you believe the conventional timeline of Göbekli Tepe, which goes back to 9,800 BC, then go that Orion and the constellation of Taurus is not going to be visible in the night sky. There's other people who's done work on this, and they say that Cygnus was the one that they were revering. But if you move the timeline, like I'm suggesting, which is basically a hypothesis, but if this turns out to be living logogram language on the stones, then you got to move that forward in time to the Bronze Age. It looks Stone Age, but and there's more archaeology that needs to be done on this, but it could be a lot earlier, perhaps in the Bronze Age. If that's the case, then the constellations Göbekli Tepe, the constellations of Orion and Taurus would be in view at that point. And yes, they were revering these constellations. I think more particularly Taurus, because this is a cosmological belief that they came from the stars, and for them to be rebirthed as a god, they had to go back through their mother Eve to be regenerated in the afterlife, so they could go back to the heavens as a star god. And so, yes, they were tracking the constellations, whether it was Cygnus or other constellations that I think are possible. They were tracking these constellations, and they did have this belief in the afterlife. I mean, it was all in their worldview, from the rising of the sun to the setting of the sun, the cycles of the moon. Spring, you're coming back into birth, all the way to winter, where where you have this kind of a death, that they picture all this from the natural to the supernatural, and so this is all embedded into their cosmology belief system. They certainly believed in the afterlife, but what they were doing is they were basically worshiping these other deifications of specifically Adam and Eve through the bull god Anu and through the crescent star. Now they're not named. We don't have any specific names that we know of, but certainly this is part of the process, at least in Enclosure D that I'm proposing, that they were venerating these gods through probably through the interventions and the affairs of the fallen angels, those 200 class Watcher angels, that at some point back in history, back during the days of Jared, that they had already started influencing mankind. So this is now playing out at Göbekli Tepe.
But folks, and Aaron, man, it's got me scratching my head, my friend. Speaking of your book, and I think you might have alluded to the Gateway of the Gods. We've talked about that many times here on this channel tonight, on this broadcast. And I know we're kind of running on time. I know your time is valuable, and I respect that, and I thank you for your time coming on tonight, by the way. But the last question that I have for you, my friend, about Göbekli Tepe, it's a two-part question. I've had a lot of those today. Had a lot of them. So
Yeah.
I'm referring to the Gateway of the Gods, right? And you referred to it, why it was buried, who was buried, and why are they trying to hide it and protect it? The second part, what is the one thing in the world, to the world, that you would like to present tonight and talk about, as far as that you can talk about, that you know about the ancestors of these history books, that are being taught by academia now? Is there something currently that they're ignoring? So a two-part question, and what's your take on that as we close today? Because it's been a very interesting conversation tonight about Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Sorry for my camera issues here, but even going back to Dr. Klaus Schmidt, who first excavated Göbekli Tepe in the mid-90s, he even thought that these two anthropomorphic images in Enclosure D represented a supernatural element, and that's where archaeology stops, because it's all material based, and the supernatural then gets left out. And I think this is a unique aspect that we're bringing in the new book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, because we bring both these elements together, and we say, look, there's a supernatural component that's happening here that probably predates even Baal worship. This may be the very beginnings, the very origins of Baal worship, going back to the deification of Adam. But this is why Dr. Judd Burton and I teamed up to write this book, to really present some new evidence here regarding what they were doing at the site and why they were there. Specifically, we present the Luvian logogram, Anatolian hieroglyphic component. We present the regeneration theory, and which challenges the timeline of Göbekli Tepe. So I think when you take a step back and you look at a 35,000 foot view, if you will, at the region, Göbekli Tepe is not the only site. This is the part of the Tastapler Stone Hills, and at a neighboring site called Kara Tepe. Now, don't confuse it with Karahan Tepe, but at Kara Tepe, 1943, archaeologists found Luvian logograms on the stones, which is a confirming evidence that this is language on the stones at Göbekli Tepe. They're just not simply art motifs. So I think that's what that we're presenting some new ideas that challenges the narrative at Göbekli Tepe. Of course, only 10% has been excavated. That leaves 90% that's still under the ground. We don't have the whole story yet. But I think what's emerging, that's becoming more clearer, is that there is a supernatural component embedded into their cosmology that is telling us a story. And that story is that they did believe in the afterlife. They did deify their two original ancestors. And this belief system in the afterlife was very important to them. But they're missing the main thing here, Brian, is that they have already turned from the original creator over to other gods. And so they've lost this Axis Mundi that you talked about, which is the original connection they had in the Garden of Eden. They've lost that original connection with God, because now they're dying physically and now they're dead spiritually. And the only way to be rebirthed is not back through your stones, back through the ancestors. The only way to be spiritually reborn, and this comes later through the gospel of Christ, through his death, burial, and resurrection. And we see that there's a way that's been provided for mankind to regain this connection, the spiritual connection back to God, through his son Jesus Christ. So this is exactly what Paul talks about in the scriptures in the New Testament, of the gospel of the grace of God, this death, burial, and resurrection that brings us back into connection with God. And certainly throughout the Old Testament and throughout ancient civilizations, we have these 70 languages that give birth into 70 nations, God relegates them over to the enemy. And he says, I'm pulling one guy out of this ancient region of Haran where they worship the moon god. We know that for sure because we see in archaeology that these crescent standards that they were worshiping. And so now we have the worship of the moon god. We know Abraham's father, Terah, worshiped other gods. This is all birthed out of the region here. So it's not just Göbekli Tepe, it's the whole entire region that's tied together, not just through architecture, not just through zoomorphic and anthropomorphic images, but through their cosmology belief system. And this is exactly why God pulls Abram, he takes Abram out of this area and he says, I'm calling one guy out. I'm calling one guy out of the enemy territory, and I'm going to birth from him a nation for myself. So the 70 nations get relegated to the enemy, and 70 principalities get put in charge of them. And God says, I'm basically done with you. I'm taking Abram out, and I'm going to call a nation that's going to be holy, that's going to usher in the kingdom later. But even Israel fumbles the ball, if you will, and they can't do it. So there's a whole thing that's happening here. But if you look at the bigger picture, we see that in this area of Göbekli Tepe, it's not isolated. All these areas in the region are tied together, and this is exactly why more excavations really need to be held at Göbekli Tepe, so we can see what the other 90% is under the ground. And I think if we can get some more information out, I think perhaps it'll lend some credence to my hypothesis on these are language alluvial logograms on the stones at Göbekli Tepe, and perhaps we'll find some other things that we don't know that will change our understanding at the site.
Wow. You know, the thing I can think of here, Aaron, just to conclude the broadcast before we end this out here, I'm thinking about the alignment of the sun and the Cygnus, the swan. And I'm thinking about, you spoke of a motif earlier, the central motif in ancient, I think it's the Denisovians that we referred to earlier, but the Siberian. I was thinking shamanism. I was thinking like frequencies, your eye perception, what you perceive, and then you talking about DMT, LSD, and going into a shamanism state and astral projection. I'm thinking harmonics, frequency, and something to do with the rocks interacting with the human and interacting with sound and interacting who is there, you know, that the blood resonance, so like who is actually there with a certain, let's just say, harmonic. There's where I'm at, kind of out there in the bluegrass state of conspiracies. Welcome to Kentucky, folks. That's where I'm from. Here the bluegrass grows. But today, we was talking about hopefully one day at Göbekli Tepe, they have trees and green grass growing back at the Göbekli Tepe site. Fun humor there to plug into the broadcast. But when you think about this, Aaron, I'm thinking about Cygnus, the sun, the way it's synchronizing, and then they call it the swan, you know, Cygnus. So you think about a swan event or whatever it is, it's almost like they knew exactly what the astronomers today do not know. And there was something so surpassed our pay grade of knowledge. And I can only imagine what, if you get to go back here soon, you get to go back to Göbekli Tepe. I hope you do. And the more information that comes out in the future, there's no telling what you'll find in the future, my friend. And it's just phenomenal conversation. Yeah. I wish we could go on longer, but I know time is valuable. And I thank you for the hour that you have given me tonight. And any more final words before we just conclude the program tonight?
Yeah.
Because okay.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for having me on. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but look, we're just excited to put this information out into a book. It took about 5 years of research, and there was no single volume where I could just source information. Information's really slow coming out of the site because it has to be cataloged and then published later. But through a lot of meticulous work, we've been able to put a lot of these references into one single volume. And then, of course, we look at the supernatural component too, which no one has done. We also tie it to a biblical perspective. which is also a first. And so we're just excited to be able to present the information to you. If you follow the footnotes in the book, you'll get an education with just so many different things. But there's hundreds of footnotes that I would encourage you to go and look at if you really want to learn more. And then, of course, we have several appendixes in the back that's not part of the main part of the book, but it does talk about the Ice Age that we talked about earlier. It talks about this younger dry savannah and some other things that we expound on in the appendixes. If you want to listen to the book, it's now on Audible, and if you're a Kindle person, then it's up on Kindle. It's all through Amazon.com, where you can get the book. And look, if you get the book and you read it and you enjoyed it, just go back to Amazon, and we're just asking for folks to give us a good review on it. And if you can make a written review, that's even better. It helps trend the book on Amazon. When it first came out, it was the #1 release in archaeology, the #1 release in prehistory. So we were really excited about that. But we don't have a whole lot of reviews on the book yet, so we would really ask that you would go back and review the book and leave us a good rating on it. If you want to follow my work, you can go to aaronjudkins.substack.com. I have a lot of articles up on there for sure. That it's a good resource. You can sign up for free. If you want the paid version, just for a few dollars a month, there's articles for paid subscribers as well. And there's just a lot of information there for you. And then tonight, for the people listening live, I'll be going on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. Central Time, it'll be 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. So just convert that to whatever time zone you're in. But it'll be live tonight on Coast to Coast AM.
Very cool, Aaron. Very cool. And like Aaron said, his Substack link is in the description. Plus this book I've got on the screen here, and plus I'm showing in the physical. I got a copy of it. I absolutely do like it. It's probably one of my favorite Göbekli Tepes as far as a very in-depth informational book, especially when it comes to the biblical narrative. And that's what it's all about. We talk about the biblical narrative on here. We talk about controversial topics, conspiracies, you name it. I even threw some conspiracy language out toward Mr. Judkins here, but I want to thank you so much again, Aaron, for coming on the channel. What a blessing it is, my friend. When we hit it off at the SpiracyCon, I met this guy at SpiracyCon, and I was super blessed to meet him. I stayed in the car with him for a long period of time, thanks to Dan and the GPSs and all that. But it was stellar. It was a stellar time back in August, and what a blessing it was. And the last question I have for you, Aaron, would you come back? Would you come back on Visual Disturbance? Would you come back?
Oh, I would love to, Brian. I'd love to, and we'll have another hour and a half of talking about whatever you want to talk about.
10-4. Well, thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure, an honor here. The first archaeologist. Check it off the bucket list. I don't have many guests on. So, folks, help me share this thing out. Help Aaron Judkins out. Share his content. Share his Substack out. You'll be glad you did. Hit the notification button. But I have a last announcement before we jump off here. Last announcement. If you guys have not seen this yet, the link is in the description box. Cities Lost in Time of Cairo, the Eye of the Sphinx. It's on FOJC Underground Church. It'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll be glad to check it out, because this is the, let's just say this, when I want to make an announcement, it's been 2 years. Can y'all believe that? 2 years since this Cities Lost in Time series has happened. So December 2023, and here we are in December 2025. Cities Lost in Time series, Cairo, here we go today. Let them know that I sent you. That'll be on at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here in about an hour and 45 minutes. You'll be glad to check it out. Get you some popcorn, coffee, all that good stuff. And like I said, Aaron Judkins, the Maverick, a.k.a. Indiana Jones, if there was a real-life Indiana Jones. And I just want to thank you so very much, Aaron Judkins, for coming on. And share us out, folks. Hit the like button. And until next time, Visual Disturbance, I'm out of here. And like I saw some say, keep it fresh, keep it real, stay away from the spray mill. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But until next time, Visual Disturbance, I am out of here.
Okay.
got one that can see.